Hello and welcome to another post of Pendragon Poetry. This is the first one for a while. I've been hibernating, but I've got a new microphone. It might sound a little bit better. So today we're looking at the Apology for Poetry by Philip Sidney. Now Philip Sidney was one of the early Elizabethan poets. Total genius, cut down in the prime of life in battle, but he really is the sort of like keystone on which the great flourishing of the Elizabethan period occurred. In 1580, there was like a paucity of poetry in the English Isles at this time. The Shepherd's Calendar had just been written by Spenser, who was kind of a protege of Sidney. He introduced him to the right circles and everything. And Shakespeare was still only like a teenager, you know what I mean? So things haven't quite kicked off. And during this period, 1579, 1580, Sidney begins to write his apology for poetry. It's the great tradition of poets' criticisms, rather than the sort of like critics who aren't poets. This is the real McCoy, like Shelley's defence of poetry, Matthew Arnold, his work, you know, Wordsworth, and especially the Biographia Literaria of Coleridge. T.S. Eliot, for example. There's a great tradition of poetic criticism, and Sidney began the whole thing off. But I just want to read a really upsetting. This is how he died. So he died in 1586 at Zutphen in battle. Meeting the marshal of the camp lightly armed, the unspotted emulation of his art to venture without any inequality made him cast off his cuisses, like armour, and so by the secret influence of destiny to disarm that part where God, it seems, had resolved to strike him. Thus they go on, every man in the head of his own troop, and the weather being misty, fell unawares upon the enemy, who had made a strong stand to receive them near to the very walls of Zutphen, by reason of which accident their troops fell, not only unexpectedly to be engaged within the level of the great shot that played from the rampiers, but the fortifications, but more fatally within shot of their muskets, which were laid in ambush within their own trenches. Blah, 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 blah. He gets shot 25 days later. Another 10 years would pass before the manuscript of An Apology for Poetry was printed. Until then, it was circulating through a select crowd, probably the intelligentsia who surrounded the Earls of Leicester and Oxford, and Shakespeare might have read a copy, who knows. But this is really the key foundation of the great renaissance of English literature after the Chaucerian Middle English period. This is when things really kick into gear again. So the Apology is based upon, say, Aristotle's Poetics and Plato's own work of poetry, Horace, you know what I mean, and also like the Renaissance Italian mind. So it's a blend of sort of philosophical thought and poetry. Now I don't know what I'm going to read out to you, but I'm going to read some of it. I'm just going to flick through it and read select passages. So let's see where we are. An Apology for Poetry. Oh, one more thing I forgot to mention. I love this. I've always carried this with me. One of Sidney's friends, Languet, said to him, "A healthy mind is good for nothing unless lodged in a healthy body." And that's absolutely true. Anyway, so here we go. So this is Sidney arguing about the antiquity of poetry. "And first, truly to all them that professing learning in vain against poetry may justly be objected, that they go very near to ungratefulness, to seek to deface that which, in the noblest nations and languages that are known, hath been the first light giver to ignorance, and first nurse, whose milk by little and little enable them to feed afterwards of tougher knowledges, and will they now play the hedgehog that, being received into the den, draw out his host, or rather the vipers, that with their birth kill their parents? Let learned Greece in any of her manifold sciences be able to shew me one book before Musaeus, Homer, and Hesiodus. All three nothing else but poets. Nay, let any history be brought that can say any writers were there before them. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, let's go for another bit. So basically, it's a massive, like, poetry's banging, mate. I've got share the same sentiment. That's why I'm doing all this. Daisy. She's down there. Oh, the mic. Oh, she's now there. Hello, Daisy. Can you say hello to the microphone? Camera. Can tell I haven't been doing this for a little while. I'm calling the camera a microphone. Right, okay, let's do some more days. Right. The preeminence claimed by philosophy and history really belongs to poetry. Now, whom shall we find, saith the question standeth for the highest form in the school of learning, to be moderator? Truly, as me seemeth the poet, and if not a moderator, even the man that ought to carry the title from them both, and much more from all other serving sciences. Therefore, compare we the poet with a historian, and with a moral philosopher, and, if he go beyond them both, no other humane skill can match him. For the divine, with all reverence, it is ever to be expected, not only for having his scope as far beyond any of those as eternity exceedeth a moment, but even for passing each of these in themselves. And for the lawyer, though just be the daughter of justice, and justice the chief of virtues, yet because he seeketh to make men good rather formidine pone than virtutis amore, or, to say righter, doth not endeavour to make men good, but that their evil hurt not others, having no care so he be a good citizen. How bad a man he... Oh my God, that sentence goes on forever. You get the idea. That's like the longest sentence I've ever read. Well, let's flick... we'll just do a couple more, and then you get the idea of... I mean, it's very florid language, it's very beautiful. To be transported to the 1579 mind, he does it really well. You really get a sense of sort of like flamboyant genius that was just about to go, woohoo! So happy days. Right, let's see what he's saying about lyric poetry. But it is not the tragedy they do mislike, for it were too absurd to cast out so excellent a representation of whatsoever is most worthy to be learned. That's the old Aristotle idea of tragedy is educational.